It was a chilly evening, just the kind of night when you want to step inside somewhere warm and cozy. The small cafe was tucked away on a quiet corner of the street, with soft golden lights spilling out from its windows, inviting passers-by to come in and take shelter from the cold. Inside, the atmosphere was a mix of soft chatter and the hum of coffee machines, filling the air with a comforting, familiar buzz. People came here for a little break from their busy lives, whether it was for a morning coffee or an afternoon pastry. But tonight, it seemed quieter than usual. Behind the counter, the barista was busy steaming milk, and a couple of customers sat by the window, enjoying their drinks. But among them, one person seemed a little different. She moved around the cafe with a calm grace, her movements smooth and practiced. She was a waitress, one of the many faces people had gotten used to over the years, but her presence was almost unnoticed. Most customers probably didn't even know her name, but she had been a part of the cafe for as long as anyone could remember. She was a quiet figure, with soft eyes and a gentle smile that made her seem approachable, even though she rarely spoke much to the customers. The cafe regulars were familiar with her, but there was something about her that felt distant, almost as though there was something more to her than what met the eye. She'd always been a mystery in a way, a person who showed up, did her work, and went home at the end of the day. People knew she was polite and efficient, but there was little else to say about her. She didn't stand out, and yet there was something about her that made you wonder. Her job wasn't easy. The cafe was a small, busy place, and the work was hard. She had to keep moving, making sure each table was taken care of, running back and forth with orders, refilling drinks, and making small talk with the customers. There was always something to do, always something to clean, or something to serve. She handled it all without complaint, but you could see the fatigue in her eyes sometimes. The long hours, the endless rush, and the never-ending cycle of customers could wear a person down. But somehow, she kept going, as if she didn't mind it at all. She had learned to blend into the background, a part of the cafe's rhythm, and that's how things went every day. Her name, though hardly ever spoken aloud, was known to those who worked with her. She had been with the cafe for years, and most of the staff had come and gone, but she remained. Sometimes the other waiters and waitresses would chat about their lives, their plans, or their dreams, but not her. She was always polite, always friendly, but she kept to herself. The cafe was her world, and that was fine with her. The cafe owner, a kind but somewhat distracted man, had grown used to the quiet way she worked. He never really thought much about it. As long as she was there, doing her job well, that was all that mattered. But every now and then, he'd catch a glimpse of her in the corner of the cafe, wiping down the counter or carrying a tray, and he'd wonder if she ever thought about something more. He never asked her, though. It wasn't his place. One evening, as the workday began to wind down, the cafe was quieter than usual. The evening rush had already passed, and only a handful of people remained, lingering over their drinks or finishing up a meal. The waitstaff moved around slowly now, cleaning up the tables and getting ready for the final stretch before closing time. The quiet waitress worked in the back, wiping down the counter, her movements slow and thoughtful. She seemed a little lost in her own world, her focus sharp but distant, as if something had been weighing on her mind. The soft clink of a cup on the counter interrupted her thoughts, and she looked up to see a couple of customers leaving, exchanging polite goodbyes with the other staff members. She nodded a quiet farewell to them, then went back to her task. There was a soft hum of conversation in the air, a constant background noise that never quite went away. But tonight, there was something different about the air. The cafe owner had mentioned earlier that they were planning something special for the coming week, a small charity event to raise funds for the local community. The place was going to be filled with more people than usual, and there would be music, food, and performances. It was supposed to be a fun evening, a chance to bring everyone together. The thought of it seemed to hang in the air as the staff went about their work, and the quiet waitress couldn't help but wonder if maybe, just maybe, she should do something for the event. But what? She wasn't a singer or a dancer. She wasn't the type to stand in front of people and perform. No, that wasn't her. Still, the thought lingered in her mind. She had always loved music. She'd been surrounded by it when she was younger. It had been a part of her life, something she could turn to when she needed comfort, when she needed to feel connected to something. But that was a long time ago. She had let that part of herself slip away when life had gotten more complicated. She had decided to focus on practical things like getting a steady job and making sure she could take care of herself. Music was a luxury, something for people who had time for dreams, and she didn't have time for that. So the piano, in the corner of the cafe, an old worn instrument that had probably seen better days, remained silent, just like her. But as the evening wore on, something inside her stirred. The thought of the event and the music that might fill the air made her feel something she hadn't felt in years, a spark of longing. She remembered the way music had always made her feel, how it had allowed her to escape, to express things she couldn't put into words. Could she really get up and play? Could she perform again? She wasn't sure. The fear of being judged, of failing in front of others, held her back. And yet, the more she thought about it, the more she realized that she had been hiding from this part of herself for too long. The music wasn't something to be afraid of. It was part of her, a part of who she was. But the question remained, was she brave enough to face it? As the night carried on, the cafe's lights dimmed, and the last customers trickled out. The staff began to clean up, wiping down tables and stacking chairs. The quiet waitress stayed behind, finishing up the last few tasks, her thoughts swirling. She couldn't shake the feeling that the time had come to make a decision. Would she continue hiding from her gift, or would she let it out and share it with the world? For a brief moment, as she looked over at the old piano in the corner, she thought she saw something different in it, an invitation, a challenge, a chance to do something she had always dreamed of but never thought possible. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to take that first step. The next day, the cafe was quieter than usual, the calm before the storm of the evening rush. The morning crowd had come and gone, leaving behind a few lingering customers who were lost in their books or their thoughts. The sun streamed in through the windows, casting long, warm rays over the tables. The quiet waitress moved around the caf, cleaning and organizing, her mind still lingering on the idea that had been growing in her since last night. The piano, the event, the thought of playing again. She didn't know why it had suddenly come back to her with such force. Maybe it was the way the music had always made her feel, how it had been a part of her in a time when she was younger and full of dreams. Or maybe it was the realization that she had buried it for too long, thinking it was something she had outgrown. But she hadn't outgrown it. It was still there, deep inside her, a part of who she was. But the thought of getting up in front of people, playing in front of them, it terrified her. What if she messed up? What if people didn't like it? What if she was just too nervous to even play a single note? The doubts crept in, as they always did, and she pushed the thought aside, telling herself it wasn't worth the risk. After all, she was just a waitress. What did she have to prove? The cafe owner, a middle-aged man who was often lost in his own world, had been planning the event for weeks. It was meant to be a charity fundraiser, a way to bring the community together and raise money for a good cause. There would be food, drinks, and music. The atmosphere would be lively and joyful, something to lift people's spirits after a long week. But there was one problem. No one had volunteered to play the piano. The old piano sat in the corner of the room, gathering dust. It was a bit out of tune, its keys sticky with years of use. Most customers ignored it, only glancing at it occasionally as they passed by. But the owner had big plans for it that night. He wanted someone to sit down and play, to bring a little magic to the evening dot. As the waitress finished wiping down the counter, she overheard a conversation between the owner and one of the other waitresses. They were discussing the upcoming event, and the owner was growing increasingly frustrated by the lack of a pianist. "I don't know what I'm going to do," he said, shaking his head. "We need someone who can play, or it's just not going to work." The waitress listened from across the room, her heart racing. She had been hearing about the event for days now, but she had never really thought much of it. It seemed like just another one of those things that happened in the background, a part of the cafe's routine. But now, as she listened to the owner's frustration, a thought crossed her mind, a thought she quickly pushed away. Could she do it? Could she play the piano for the event? She paused for a moment, her fingers hovering over the cloth she had been using to clean. The thought was crazy. She hadn't played in years. What if she was rusty? What if she forgot the notes? She wasn't even sure she could still remember how to read sheet music. But at the same time, something inside her stirred, an old feeling she hadn't felt in a long time. A sense of possibility. Maybe this was the moment she had been waiting for. Maybe this was the chance to finally let go of the fear and step into the light. But she didn't speak up. She didn't offer to help. She couldn't. It was easier to stay in the background, to remain invisible. No one expected anything from her, and that was fine. The piano would stay quiet, just as it always had. The event would go on without her involvement, and that would be the end of it. It was safer that way. The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity. The cafe filled with the usual lunchtime crowd, and the waitstaff rushed to keep up with the orders. The waitress moved between the tables, her thoughts drifting back to the piano. She could feel it calling to her, but she tried to ignore it. It wasn't her time. Not yet. But as the evening approached, she found herself standing in front of the piano, her hand resting lightly on its dusty surface. She wasn't sure why she had come over to it, but she was there now. The keys looked so inviting, as if they were waiting for her to play them again. She ran her fingers over the top of the piano, the sound of the dust shifting under her touch. The only noise in the room. She sighed, feeling a rush of emotion. The piano had always been a part of her life, something she had once loved deeply, but she had let it go. She had let it become a distant memory dot as she stood there, lost in her thoughts. She heard a voice behind her. It was the owner, coming over to check on her. "Hey," he said, smiling. "I've been thinking about the event, and I was wondering, do you know anyone who can play the piano?" His voice was casual, but she could sense the underlying frustration. "We really need someone, or the night's not going to feel right. The piano's been sitting there for weeks now, but I haven't heard a single note out of it. Maybe you know someone who could play?" She froze for a moment, her fingers still resting on the keys. Her heart began to race. She knew exactly what he was asking, and for a brief moment, she felt the weight of the decision press down on her. Was this her chance? Should she say something? The words were stuck in her throat, but then, without really thinking, she spoke up. "I can play," she said, her voice soft and uncertain. The owner stopped in his tracks, looking at her in surprise. "You can play?" he asked, his eyebrows raising. "I didn't know you played the piano." She nodded, her hand still resting on the keys. "Yeah, I used to, a long time ago." There was a pause, and then the owner's face softened. "Well, that's great. I didn't know you had that talent. Maybe you could play for the event. It would be amazing to have you there. It'll be a small thing, nothing too big, but it'll make the night feel special." She wasn't sure what came over her in that moment. The fear, the doubt, everything that had held her back for so long seemed to fade away, replaced by something else, something that felt like hope, or maybe even excitement. "I'll do it," she said, surprising even herself. "I'll play." The owner smiled, clearly relieved. "Thank you. I knew we could count on you. It's going to be a great night, and you're going to be the highlight of it." As he walked away, leaving her standing there in front of the piano, a mix of emotions flooded through her. She couldn't believe she had said yes. What had she just agreed to? She had no idea how she would perform in front of others after so long, but there was a part of her that knew she couldn't back out now. She had taken the first step, and with that, she took a deep breath and sat down at the piano. Her fingers hovered over the keys for a moment, unsure, but then she began to play. Slowly at first, just a few notes, then a little more. It felt familiar, like something she had known all along, even though it had been years since she had last played. The music filled the air, and for a moment, everything else faded away. It was just her and the piano, and that felt like enough. Days leading up to the charity event seemed to fly by faster than she expected. The quiet waitress found herself caught in the usual rush of the cafe, running between tables, taking orders, refilling drinks, and all the while, her mind kept drifting back to the piano. She had agreed to play. There was no turning back now. But even as the event drew closer, she couldn't shake the feeling that maybe she had made a mistake. What if she couldn't do it? What if the music didn't flow the way it used to? What if everyone laughed, or worse, just didn't care? The old piano had a way of sitting in the corner, silent and still, almost as if it were waiting for her to sit down and make the first move. She hadn't had a moment to practice much yet, between the shifts at the cafe and the rest of her responsibilities. There hadn't been time, but every chance she got, she would sneak over to the corner and run her fingers across the keys. At first, the music felt stiff and awkward, as if she were relearning everything. The familiar notes, the old songs, seemed to slip through her fingers like sand. But after a few attempts, the music started to come back to her, slowly but surely. She had always loved playing the piano. It had been something she had done every day when she was younger, a way to express everything she couldn't say. Music had been her safe place, the one thing that felt true to her. But when life had started to get complicated, she had pushed it aside. She had thought there was no room for it anymore. But here she was, about to step back into that world, and it felt terrifying. The evening before the event, she stood in front of the piano once more, trying to focus. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and began to play. It wasn't perfect, but it felt right. The notes came together, and for a moment, she forgot everything else, the worries, the doubts, the fear. It was just her and the piano, and that felt like enough. She played for what felt like hours, letting the music wash over her, letting it fill the space around her. She hadn't felt this free in years. When the cafe closed for the night, she sat in the back, her hands still, resting on the piano keys, her mind drifting between the notes. The staff was finishing up their cleaning, getting ready to leave, and she could hear them chatting in the background. It was a normal evening, just like any other, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. The next morning, the cafe owner came in early to prepare for the event. He was full of energy, running around, making sure everything was set up. The staff was busy too, cleaning, setting tables, and organizing things. The quiet waitress tried to keep a low profile as she worked. She didn't want anyone to make a big deal of her playing. It was still a new thing for her, something she wasn't sure she was ready to share with everyone. The owner came over to her as she wiped down a table, a big smile on his face. "I'm so glad you agreed to play tonight," he said. "It's going to be a great evening. I know it." She smiled back, trying to hide the nervousness that was building inside her. "I hope so," she said quietly. He patted her on the back. "Don't worry. You're going to do great. Just relax and enjoy it. Everyone's going to love it." She nodded, but inside, she wasn't so sure. The idea of performing in front of a crowd, no matter how small, felt like a mountain she wasn't sure she could climb. But she had agreed. She had promised. And she couldn't back out now. As the cafe filled up with guests that evening, the atmosphere grew more lively. The air was filled with the sounds of laughter, clinking glasses, and soft chatter. The event was starting to take shape. People were gathering around the tables, sipping drinks and talking to each other. The food was set out on a long table, a buffet of delicious appetizers, and the air smelled of freshly baked bread and roasted vegetables. It felt warm, inviting, and alive. The piano sat in the corner, waiting. She could see it from where she was standing, and every time she glanced at it, her heart skipped a beat. She knew she had to get up there, to sit at the piano and play, but it felt like such a huge step. What if people didn't like it? What if she wasn't good enough? The doubts crept in again, but she forced herself to focus. She had practiced. She had gotten back into the rhythm of it. She could do this. The owner came by once more, giving her an encouraging smile. "It's almost time," he said. "You ready?" She took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. "Yeah, I'm ready." As the first few notes of the event began, people mingling, drinks being served, she found herself walking toward the piano. She could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on her, even though they weren't looking at her yet. She sat down, her fingers hovering over the keys. The sound of the room faded away as she focused on the piano. She didn't want to make a scene. She just wanted to play. The first few chords were shaky, but she quickly regained her composure. The music began to flow more easily as she found her rhythm. She let the melody fill the space, letting the music take her away from the nerves, away from the fear. She could hear the quiet hum of the crowd behind her, but it didn't matter. The music was her world now. The people in the cafe began to notice her. At first, it was just a few curious glances, but soon the room fell into a hush. People turned to look, some with surprise, some with intrigue. No one had expected this from the quiet waitress. She wasn't the type to stand out, the type to put herself in the spotlight. And yet here she was, playing a beautiful, haunting melody that filled the air. As she continued, she felt herself sinking deeper into the music. It was as if she had forgotten everything else. The cafe, the people, the doubts, all of it faded into the background. It was just her and the piano. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like she was doing exactly what she was supposed to be doing. The crowd was quiet, mesmerized by the music. She didn't know how long she played. But when she finally finished, the room was completely still. For a moment, there was silence. Then, slowly, the applause began. It was soft at first, hesitant, as if the audience couldn't believe what they had just heard. But as they realized what they had witnessed, a quiet waitress stepping up and playing the piano with such grace and skill, the applause grew louder, more enthusiastic. She couldn't believe it. She had done it. She had stepped up and played, and the audience had loved it. She had faced her fear, and it had been worth it. The music had done its job. It had reached them. And in that moment, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Pride. Pride in herself, in her talent, and in the courage she had found to share it. The owner came over, clapping along with the crowd. "That was amazing," he said. "You were incredible. I knew you had it in you." She smiled, her heart still racing. "Thank you," she whispered, still overwhelmed by the response. It wasn't just about the music. It was about what she had done. She had stepped into the light, and for once it felt good. As the night went on, the event continued, but she couldn't stop thinking about that moment, the moment when she had sat down at the piano and let the music take over. She had found something she had lost long ago, and now she realized there was no going back. The night after the charity event, the cafe felt different. The morning sun streamed through the windows, casting a soft glow over the tables. But it wasn't just the light that made the cafe feel new. It was the sense of change that lingered in the air. The quiet waitress had done something the night before that no one had expected, something that had left a lasting impression on everyone who had witnessed it. She had played the piano, and it had been beautiful. The staff was in a cheerful mood that morning. People had stayed after the event, chatting and congratulating her on her performance. She hadn't expected it. In fact, she hadn't expected anything at all. She thought that once the music stopped, everything would go back to normal. But it didn't. There was a shift now, a new energy in the air. The owner was busy in the back, tidying up and organizing things. The other staff members were running around preparing for the new day, taking care of orders and getting everything set up. The waitress moved through the cafe like she usually did, but this time it was different. People smiled at her, nodded, and even stopped to thank her for the beautiful music. It felt strange, but in a good way. For once, she wasn't just the quiet waitress behind the counter. She was the one who had stepped into the spotlight, if only for a brief moment. And that made all the difference. Despite the praise, she couldn't help but feel a little unsettled. She wasn't used to attention, especially the kind that came with a performance. She had always been comfortable being in the background, blending in with the rest of the cafe, just another part of the daily routine. But now, it felt like people were seeing her in a new light, and she wasn't sure how to handle it. She didn't want to make a big deal out of it. It wasn't about the attention. It had never been about that. It was about the music, the way it made her feel alive again. But deep down, she couldn't deny that a part of her was craving more. More music, more of that feeling, more of whatever it was that had brought her to life the night before. As the hours passed, she found herself back at the piano, her fingers lightly brushing over the keys as though she were testing the waters. She wasn't sure if she was ready to play again. She didn't want to seem like she was showing off, or that she was seeking approval. But when she sat down, the music came naturally. The melody filled the empty space around her, and she felt a sense of peace that was hard to describe. The cafe was quiet now, with only a few early morning customers scattered at tables, but she didn't mind. It was just her and the piano again. And for the first time in a long time, it felt right. She played for a while, losing herself in the notes until she heard footsteps approaching. Startled, she turned to see the cafe owner standing in the doorway, watching her with a smile. "Hey," he said, stepping into the room. "You're playing again. I thought I'd catch you before the rush starts." She felt a little embarrassed, but she gave him a small smile in return. "I didn't mean to make a scene," she said quietly, her fingers still hovering over them. "Keys, no scene," he replied, his voice light. "I'm just glad to see you enjoying yourself. You know, I've been thinking about last night. You were amazing. People are still talking about your performance. It really made the event special." She didn't know how to respond to that. "I didn't think anyone would notice," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you kidding?" The owner said, walking over to her. It was the highlight of the night. "You brought something to the event that no one was expecting. You brought ... heart. And people felt that. She looked down at the piano keys, feeling a mixture of emotions. The praise was nice, but it also made her feel exposed. She had shared something so personal, so raw, and now people were acknowledging it. It wasn't something she was used to, and it made her feel vulnerable. I just ... I didn't expect it to turn out that way, she said, finally looking up at him. I didn't think I'd be able to do it, but once I started playing, it was like everything else disappeared. He smiled warmly. That's exactly why you should keep playing. You have something special, and you shouldn't hide it. Maybe you could even perform more often. I think people would love to hear you. The idea of performing more often made her stomach tighten with nerves. She wasn't sure she was ready for that kind of commitment. The thought of being on stage, in front of a crowd, what if she failed? What if she couldn't live up to the expectations? I don't know, she said hesitantly. I'm not sure I'm ready for all that. It was just a one-time thing. The owner looked at her thoughtfully. You don't have to decide anything right now, but I just wanted to let you know that you have a gift. And gifts like that shouldn't be kept hidden. If you ever decide you want to share it more, well, the opportunity's here. I'm sure people would love it. She nodded slowly, unsure of what to say. The idea of performing regularly, of stepping into the light in a way she had never done before, was both exciting and terrifying. She wasn't sure if she could handle the pressure, but the seed had been planted. She could feel it. And part of her wondered what it would be like to step out of her comfort zone and see where it led. As the day went on and more customers began to fill the cafe, she found herself lost in thought, replaying the owner's words in her head. She had always been content with her quiet life, working behind the scenes, blending into the background. But now, after the performance, she couldn't shake the feeling that maybe there was more for her out there, more to give, more to experience, more to share. But what if she wasn't ready? What if the fear held her back? That evening, as the sun began to set and the cafe started to fill up again, she found herself standing in front of the piano once more. The air was buzzing with the sound of conversations, the clinking of coffee cups, and the smell of freshly brewed drinks. It was the same as any other evening. But tonight felt different. Tonight, she wasn't just a waitress. She was someone who had something to offer, something unique. She sat down at the piano again, her fingers lightly brushing over the keys. The room hummed with energy around her, but as she began to play, everything else faded away. It wasn't a performance this time. It was just her, playing for herself, lost in the music once more. It was a reminder of who she had been before life had become so focused on just getting by. The music was still there. It was still a part of her. As she played, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. The music was familiar, comforting, and it made her feel alive in a way she hadn't felt in so long. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she felt ready to take a step into the unknown. Maybe she wasn't ready to perform regularly, but she was ready to see where the music could take her. And that, for now, was enough. The days that followed felt like a whirlwind. The quiet waitress had become a different person overnight, at least in some ways. She was still the same, working the same shifts, serving the same customers, moving through her routines, but something inside her had shifted. She had tasted something she hadn't expected, a new sense of possibility, a sense of purpose beyond just the day-to-day. And it felt both exciting and daunting at the same time. After the charity event, the owner had approached her a few more times, always with encouragement. Each time, he reminded her of the talent she had, of the way the music had touched people. It was clear to him that she had a gift, and he wasn't shy about telling her that she should share it with others more often. But she still wasn't Sure. She didn't know if she was ready to step out of the shadows and into the spotlight. It felt safer where she was behind the counter, in the background, where no one was expecting anything from her. The mornings at the cafe were the same as always, busy with the usual rush of orders, the sounds of customers chatting, and the clinking of plates and glasses. But there was something new about the way people looked at her. Some of the regulars had started to come in earlier, and they would sit near the piano, smiling at her when she passed by. Others had started to ask if she'd be playing again. And though she felt a little self-conscious about it, she couldn't deny that a part of her liked the attention. It was a new experience, one she wasn't used to, but one that made her feel like maybe she was capable of more than she had ever thought. One evening, after another long shift, she found herself alone in the cafe once more. It was late, and the last of the customers had filtered out. The owner was in the back, cleaning up, and the rest of the staff had left for the night. The quiet waitress stood by the piano, looking at it for a long moment, unsure of whether to sit down. It had been a few days since she last played. The music still felt fresh in her mind, but she had been hesitant to return to it. What if she couldn't play like she had before? What if the magic was gone? But tonight, she felt the pull again. She wasn't sure why, but something about the stillness of the cafe, the soft hum of the refrigerator in the background, made her want to sit down and play. She needed to. It wasn't just about the music anymore. It was about finding something inside herself that she hadn't even realized was missing. She sat down at the piano, her fingers brushing over the keys as she closed her eyes for a moment. The familiar sensation of the cool ivory under her fingertips gave her a sense of calm. The nervousness from before started to fade as she let the music fill the space. She wasn't performing for anyone now, just playing for herself, just letting the notes flow out without thinking too much about it. At first, the music was slow, tentative, like a whispered conversation. She played a few of the old songs she had loved as a child, simple, beautiful melodies that had always comforted her. The music wrapped around her like an old, familiar blanket, and for a while she let it carry her. The cafe was quiet. The only sound the steady rhythm of her fingers on the keys, the soft thrum of the piano as it resonated in the empty space. As she played, she felt herself slipping deeper into the music, lost in the melodies she knew so well. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't thinking about what people expected from her, or whether she was good enough. She was simply playing because it felt right. And that was enough. It was in that moment that she heard the door open. Behind her, the sound of footsteps echoed softly in the cafe, and she froze for a moment, thinking someone had come in. She turned her head to see the owner standing in the doorway, watching her with a smile. "You're playing again," he said, his voice soft and encouraging. "I thought I'd catch you before you finished." She smiled sheepishly, feeling a little embarrassed. "I didn't mean to make a big deal out of it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have to make a big deal out of it," he replied, walking over to her. "It's just ... I think it's amazing that you're playing again. You know, the staff and some of the regulars have been talking about you, asking when you'll play next. People really enjoyed your performance, and they're hoping you'll share more of that." Her heart skipped a beat at the thought. "I didn't think anyone would be interested," she said, her hands resting on the keys. "Oh, they are," he said, leaning against the counter nearby. "You have something special, and people can feel it. I think it might be time to share that with others more regularly. You don't have to do anything big, just a small set here and there. It doesn't have to be a huge thing. But the more you play, the more people will get to see what you can do." She hesitated, the doubts creeping in again. "I don't know. I'm not sure I'm ready for something like that." He smiled and nodded. "I understand. It's a big step." But you don't have to rush it. Just think about it. If you want to play more, the opportunity is here. And I'll be here to support you. You're not alone in this. The thought of performing regularly, of stepping into that world more often, was both thrilling and terrifying. But as she sat there, looking at the piano and listening to the quiet of the cafe, she realized that the decision wasn't as big as it felt. She wasn't committing to anything she wasn't ready for. It was just an idea, a possibility. She could take it one step at a time, at her own pace. "I'll think about it," she said, finally looking up at the owner with a small, uncertain smile. "Maybe, maybe I'll play a little more. But not tonight." "That's okay," he said, his smile kind and understanding. "No pressure. Just know that you're doing something amazing, and people notice. We're lucky to have you here." The quiet waitress felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. She didn't expect the praise, but it felt good. It made her realize that maybe, just maybe, she had something worth sharing. And that thought, that possibility, was enough to keep her going. The owner turned to leave, giving her some space. She sat there for a while longer, her fingers lightly tapping the keys. Lost in thought. She wasn't sure where the path would lead, whether it would stay small, like the cafe performances, or grow into something bigger. But for the first time, she didn't feel afraid of it. She felt curious. And curiosity, she knew, was the first step. Later that night, after everything was cleaned up and the last of the customers had left, she stood in front of the piano one last time. The cafe was quiet again, the dim lights casting long shadows on the floor. She wasn't sure what was coming next, but for once, she didn't mind the uncertainty. She had always known how to play the piano, but now she realized she was learning how to play her own life in a new way. The music had been there all along. All she had to do was let it out. And maybe, just maybe, she was finally ready to share it with the world. The next few weeks felt like a journey into unknown territory. The quiet waitress had taken the first steps toward something new, something she had never imagined. She hadn't made any big decisions yet, but each day seemed to bring her closer to the idea that maybe she wasn't meant to stay hidden forever. Maybe it was time for her to start sharing the music, to start sharing herself. The owner of the cafe continued to encourage her, but he had never pushed too hard. He simply gave her space, always reminding her that the opportunity was there, if she ever wanted it. And gradually, the idea of playing more often started to feel less like an overwhelming leap and more like a natural next step. At first, she decided to play during the quieter times of the day, early mornings or late afternoons, when the cafe wasn't too crowded. She would sit down at the piano, her fingers hesitant at first, but as the notes filled the room, she began to relax. She still wasn't sure if she wanted to perform in front of a crowd, but there was something about the feeling of the music filling the space that made her feel more alive. It wasn't about the attention. It was about the freedom of expression, the release of emotions she had kept buried for so long. One evening, after another peaceful session at the piano, she heard the sound of footsteps approaching. She had been so lost in the music that she hadn't noticed the cafe was beginning to fill with customers. The familiar buzz of conversations and laughter filled the air, and she realized that, once again, people were noticing her. Some of the regulars had stopped by to grab a coffee. Others had come in to catch up with friends. But a few had lingered near the piano, glancing at her as she played. She wasn't sure if she should keep going. Would it feel like an interruption? Would people be annoyed? But before she could second-guess herself, a voice called out from across the room. "Are you playing tonight?" Someone asked, a friendly voice that caught her off guard. She turned to see a couple of regulars standing near the piano, smiling at her. They had been coming to the cafe for months, always greeting her with a wave or a smile. She hadn't realized they'd noticed her playing. I wasn't planning on it, she said, feeling a little awkward. I was just playing for myself. The woman stepped forward, her eyes warm. Well, we'd love to hear you. It's been so nice hearing the music in the background. You've really got something special. She wasn't sure what to say. She hadn't expected anyone to want to listen. But there was something in the woman's tone, something kind and encouraging, that made her feel a little braver. Okay, she said, taking a deep breath. I'll play a bit more. The woman and her friend smiled and made their way back to their seats. The quiet waitress sat there for a moment, gathering her thoughts. She could feel her heart beating a little faster. This wasn't just playing for herself anymore. People were listening. Taking a deep breath, she placed her hands on the keys again. She didn't try to force anything. Instead, she let her fingers move naturally, following the rhythm that felt right. The music started softly, almost as if it were a conversation, a gentle flow of notes that matched the ebb and flow of the cafe around her. The sound filled the space, not too loud, not too quiet, just enough to add something special to the atmosphere. As she played, she noticed that more people had gathered around. They weren't crowding her, but there were more eyes on her now. The sounds of the cafe faded into the background as the music took center stage. And for the first time, she didn't feel nervous. She wasn't playing for applause or praise. She was just playing, and that felt enough. The music seemed to settle over the room, transforming the energy of the cafe. Conversation softened, people leaned in a little closer to listen, and for a few minutes, the busy cafe felt like a completely different place. It was no longer just a cafe. It was a space where music could take over, where people could connect with something more than just their daily routines. The quiet waitress let herself get lost in the music. She played longer than she expected, allowing herself to explore new melodies, new rhythms. And in that moment, she realized something. It wasn't about whether she was ready to perform or not. It was about allowing herself to be vulnerable, to share something meaningful with others. She didn't need to be perfect. She just needed to play from the heart. When the last note lingered in the air and the music faded into silence, the cafe erupted into applause. It wasn't loud or overwhelming, just genuine, warm applause. People were smiling, nodding, and even clapping softly in appreciation. The quiet waitress looked up, her heart racing, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from a sense of connection, a realization that she had shared something real with the people in the room. She didn't know what to say at first, so she simply smiled and nodded in thanks. She wasn't used to the attention, but in that moment, she realized that maybe she was ready for it. Not in the way she had always feared, but in a way that felt true to who she was. Later that evening, the owner came over to her, his eyes shining with approval. That was amazing, he said. You really brought something special to the cafe tonight. People loved it. She felt a warm flush of pride, but she shrugged it off. I wasn't sure if it would be okay. I didn't want to interrupt anything. The owner shook his head. You didn't interrupt anything. You made it better. The whole atmosphere changed when you started playing. You have a gift, and people can feel that. His words made her heart swell. She wasn't sure she could ever get used to being called gifted, but it felt good to hear. It was a reminder that she didn't have to hide anymore. She didn't have to be afraid of sharing her music or of being seen. People appreciated it, and that was enough. Over the next few weeks, she began to play more often. The cafe had become a place where she could share her music, where she could be herself without the pressure of performing for an audience. Some nights, she played for herself. Other nights, she played for the customers who had come to expect her presence by the piano. She still wasn't a performer in the traditional sense. She wasn't booking gigs or planning grand shows. But she had found a way to share her music with others in a way that felt right for her. The owner continued to encourage her, but he never pushed her to take things further than she was ready for. It was the perfect balance. And as time went on, the quiet waitress found that her music had become more than just a way to pass the time. It had become a way to connect, a way to share a piece of herself with others. One evening, as she played softly during the late-night shift, she looked up and realized that she no longer felt invisible. She was still the same person, still the same quiet waitress, but now she had something to offer. And that made all the difference. She didn't know where this new path would lead, but for the first time in a long time, she felt excited about the possibilities. The music was no longer something she kept hidden away. It was a part of her, something she could share freely with the world. And that was enough.